Most parents can feel when school is not working for their child. The child comes home and something happens during the evening routine where the parent realizes again and again that this is just not working for my child. The problem is that we have been trained to equate school with learning. We are taught to think that school and learning are the same thing. They're not. School and learning are not the same thing. Learning does not have to look like school to be real. So let's break this down. When you understand the difference between learning and school, everything changes. We equate books and worksheets and notebooks and sitting at a desk and maybe even bells and grades and grade reports and 9-week reports from the teacher. We equate all that with learning, with education. But that's just one structure and one model. Okay, it's the industrial era model. Learning can happen in many, many different ways. The industrial era model of school works for some kids, which is why it is still around, and it will probably be around for a while because we still have assembly lines and we still have factories. We also still have schools. We produce mass learning, mass education. That is one model of learning. Now, if you think about it, it doesn't define learning. School is a system. Learning is a human process. Okay, so school is a system. Learning is a human process. Learning happens when? When do you learn? When does your child learn? The brain has to engage, right? We all agree with that. If we're just coasting, if we're just spacing out, we're not learning. So the brain, first of all, has to engage. Number two, the child has to connect the meaning between what he's hearing and what he understands of the world. And number three, the skills will transfer over contexts. So, for instance, we've got a classroom, 30 same age peers, 6-hour blocks, standardized pacing. That is school. Learning happens when we have three things: mastery, curiosity, and a skill transfer. You have to transfer the skill from the book to the child, from the teacher to the learner. So let's go into the three pillars of learning. Mastery is more important than pacing. Learning happens when a child can absorb information, make it his own, and apply it, right? So that's when mastery happens. Now, some children learn faster than others. There's a famous scene in The West Wing where CJ, the press secretary, doesn't get something as fast as her boss, the communications director, Toby. And he just gave her a few seconds. They talked about something that happened, and he gave her a few seconds to realize the meaning, to interpret what they had just learned. Because he walked into her office and hit her with his conclusion, and she's like, no, that's not what happened, that's not what that means. And he just stood there and he gave her a few seconds so her brain can connect the facts with their symbolism and with the consequence. And then she finally got it, and she looked at him and said, you are right, but just because it took me a few seconds Longer doesn't mean I'm less intelligent. And it's funny, and we laugh at it, and we think, no, that's exactly what it means, but that's not what it means. Speed happens for some kids. They get it fast, and they're not at an advantage. They're actually at a disadvantage because all of a sudden they've got this attitude of, oh, I get things fast. I don't need to work hard. How many parents have I met who say, my kid is so smart. He just won't sit down to do the work. He just won't apply himself. If he just applied himself. I've heard that about piano players from piano teachers who say he would be so good if he just took the time to 20 minutes a day to go through his scales and arpeggios. I've heard that about concepts like in math and physics, right? So STEM skills. I've heard that from teachers of humanities. Like, man, you have no accent when you learn this language. If you just spend 30 minutes a day just listening to more tapes or more MP3 downloads or, whatever you need in order to expose yourself to that skill, that knowledge, if you just took that time. Speed does not mean intelligence. So all of a sudden, you've got these kids that can master things fast and others who do not. The problem is in school, there's only one pace. And in fact, the kids who move fast are being thwarted because they want to move faster, but the pace is somewhere slower under their level. And then the kids who move really slow are also underserved because the pace is somewhere in the middle for the average learner. So you've got two categories of kids who are not going to enjoy school. The really fast ones that catch on early, and then the slower ones that need a little bit more time, a little more explanation. And then mastery happens for the ones in the middle, but even then, maybe they're not paying attention. Maybe the core concept was shared the moment when they were looking out the window or they were looking at somebody picking up something from their desk, or there's that disconnect of time and delivery of concepts. So the pacing in school will definitely affect mastery. And that takes us to the next level, curiosity. Curiosity is more important than compliance. I'm not anti-discipline. I'm not anti-order. In fact, I enjoy a plan, a schedule. I enjoy obedience for my children. I used to work with Dr. Raymond Moore, who said that obedience is preschool 101. You don't go past preschool without obedience. If your children are not obeying you as a parent, and if you decide to homeschool as a homeschool parent, you can't go anywhere. So I'm not anti-order and anti-discipline. However, complying with sitting at a desk for so many hours, being quiet, listening to the teacher for so many minutes, drone on and on about a subject that you are not curious about, that kind of compliance is not as important as curiosity. Curiosity will produce thinkers. Okay, if I'm curious about something, I'm going to start thinking about it. I'm going to try to figure it out. I will look for resources. I will ask my parents. I will ask my peers about something that I'm curious about. Curiosity is a gem to be treasured in our children in any kind of age. Now, compliance will produce quiet classrooms, and we all love quiet classrooms, right? Teachers love a quiet classroom, but there's a point where you realize if my child is not curious, he's not going to learn. And just the fact that he's complying with me now for 1 year, for 5 years, for 15, 18 years, doesn't mean he's learning what I'm telling him. So curiosity over compliance. And then we go into skill transfer, because this is where learning becomes real, right? We've got mastery, we've got curiosity, and then we've got a skill transfer. The skill transfer that has to happen is more important than memorization. I learned in a school system, and memorization was key. And I was very good at memorizing. And it was rote memorization. I spoke later on in life with people who were educated in the British school system, and that was also encouraged. The Commonwealth, people from Jamaica, people from Australia, Canada, and even the United States, at some point, no longer part of the Commonwealth, but still very much influenced by Prussia and Great Britain when it comes to education. And so all these learners told me rote memorization was encouraged. It was the key to get grades. I'm here to tell you, we need to retrain our minds to think about a skill transfer. And that leads us to the question, how do you transfer skills? How does that happen? Because if knowledge cannot move outside the classroom, if knowledge cannot move outside the test, then learning has not happened. You can call it education. You can call it a diploma. But a lot of you are telling me, I had 2 years of Spanish, I got straight A's, I don't remember anything, right? So it's not integrated. If it's not integrated into your life, it won't happen. The brain has to engage, the child has to connect everything, meaning, the child has to connect the meaning, and the skill has to transfer. I have had over 12 years of homeschooling so far and counting. And the patterns I've observed, not just in my two very different learners, a boy and a girl, one's very creative, one's very obedient and wants to know the rules. The way they flourish, because they've got different personalities, they are presented with the same opportunity, and they flourish in different ways. This system that we call education and school cannot cater to all the kinds of learners that exist in this world. This is not about rejecting school. I loved going to school growing up, and I had no other options. I didn't know anything about homeschooling until I was 19. I did not even know homeschooling existed until I was 19, and I came to the United States. This video is about understanding that school is not the definition of learning. School does not equate learning. Once you separate the idea of learning from the structure of the school, the building, then you gain freedom. And you don't necessarily pull your child out, but you ask better questions. I used to think that I needed answers. Now I know that I need better questions. No matter what I'm trying to learn or accomplish as an adult in my own life, as a mother, as a wife, as a communicator, it's not the answers that I need. It's the questions. I need to ask better questions. And so this conceptual understanding of learning is different from school will help you ask better questions. In the next video, I'm going to talk about what happens when a child is labeled behind. Has your child been labeled behind? Because that word might not mean what you think it means. It might not mean what we all think it means. I'll see you in the next video.